Hey everyone, welcome back to the Overseers. I'm Proelios and I'm joined as usual by my co host Nightwing. And in this episode, we'll be doing a team preview of the Boston Uprising going into Season 5 of the Overwatch League. As usual, we'll kick things off by reviewing the tank line and then move on to the other roles and the coaching stuff from there. So let's just start things off by talking about Marvel, ITSAL, and Punk. Nightwing, I think I'll let you go first here. Which of these tanks do you think is the most promising, and why do you think so?
I think that's a fairly tough question, if I'm being honest. When Marvel was first picked up for the Boston Uprising, I thought he's probably one of the tanks that you could probably even trust with solo tanking, if you'd like trust any tank in the Overwatch League, because even though he's not at that very top echelon, he's the only main tank you've seen that has consistently also played off tank, uh, because of the weird decisions of the Soul Dynasty in the past. So, in terms of flexibility, I might almost give it to Marvel. But that said, on those uh, off tank roles, I'd probably still have to give it to Punk because he's a specialist. So it's a bit of a hard ask to really answer that question. Uh, but it's probably a good thing that they've got these two. Uh, sort of veterans from the Overwatch League, and they've added a third piece. So yeah, Marvel comes in from the Soul Dynasty. He had a very weird situation there, balancing play with sort of sharing play time with both off tanks and main tanks, in Gesture and the off tank for Soul Dynasty. I forget his name,
To you.
but oh yeah, to uh, so yeah, very weird situation for him, and I want to see him actually commit to a certain set of heroes, despite the flexibility that Overwatch 2 might require out of players. Um, I think if he just focuses on a select few heroes instead of being spread thin and made to play off roles for him, he should be still good. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just start off with Punk here because he's the uh, veteran coming in from last year, right? So Punk had a good season individually last year. I felt like he showed good awareness on Diva, also played a decent Zarya, at least better than Gable Shi, who was the other off tank who left this team this year. But Punk still felt a little bit out of place on this otherwise Korean roster, which might also be why he seemed out of sync with Stand 1, who was the main tank for the team. And I feel like Punk kind of needs to be on a more westernized roster, but he did show some promise last year, so it made sense for Boston to retain him. I personally think that if you're going to rely on him to play a solo tank, that might be better because he doesn't have to rely on a second tank. He just has to take charge himself, and then his team has to kind of follow, which seems like a better role for him. But all in all, I'm going to be wary before I kind of try and judge how good he will be next year. Then just talking about Marvel, I think it's a really odd pickup because uh, Marvel had a very underwhelming season with the Soul Dynasty last year. He didn't have a stable starting spot, thanks to Gesture, and I don't think he has played on a mixed roster before either. So Boston signing him into this particular lineup is puzzling to me. Um, I feel like Marvel might have joined this Western region because he was willing to be signed at a low cost. Because I'm sure not many teams are impressed with his recent performances, and because Boston, I guess, spent heavy amounts of money to get a few of their players whom we'll get to. I don't think it's like a fantastic pickup. Uh, I don't think he'll be really competitive this season, to be honest. And talking about ITSAL, who is a Korean main tank player who was recently playing for Uprising Academy, um, I think like ITSAL wasn't like insanely good, but he did pretty well with Uprising Academy in any contenders. Uh, although I didn't watch him playing in NA, I watched him back when he was with Genji, and like I said, I didn't find him insanely good, and I don't really think he has god tier caliber on any main tank hero. But I will say that his Wrecking Ball does seem more competent than Marvel's, and he seems to have played a lot of it back in Korea. So He'll probably be a ball specialist with Marvel picking up the other three main tanks in addition to probably Sigma. But ITSAL will probably just be league average. So all in all, I'm not really impressed with this tank line. I don't think any of them have carry potential. Uh, but it just remains to be seen how they are coached in order to extract some more value out of them. Any points to add here, Nightwing, or shall we move on to the DPS?
I mean, all I really have to say about ITSAL is that he did have a good performance in NA contenders recently in last year, and they did sort of lose out to Redbird Esports, which had players that have been signed to the Overwatch League. So this is sort of the second crop, uh, sort of second layer of the cream of the crop in terms of NA contenders talent as well. Even though I mean he's from Korea, obviously. Uh, so it should still be a prospect that you might, hold out some excitement for, but I wouldn't, be too jazzed about him either. And the tank line as a whole is okay at best. I feel there's no particular superstar that I would heavily rely on.
Yep, I completely agree. And let's move on to the DPS line. And I'd like to start things off with Victoria, who is also another Korean player promoted from Uprising Academy this year. Now, Victoria is a hit scan player who doesn't have a lot of pro experience, but he has had some great showings in any contenders, especially on Tracer and Hanzo, from what I remember. I really admire his mechanical skill level and also his positioning. It's like literally textbook positioning. If you're watching his gameplay as a coach, you will like appreciate that he's playing in the right spots at the right time. So he seems to be highly coachable because it's rare that you find someone with so little experience to be so disciplined in game. So even though his gameplay hasn't been top tier, I think he can be molded into a really good player. So I'm excited to see him here, and I mainly remember Victoria like just by one moment, like on when he was playing on Havana, like he was playing Hanzo and he was like playing against, if I remember correctly, Sam, who's with the San Francisco Shock now. So Sam was on Genji and he was already deflecting in Victoria's face, but this guy just shoots out an arrow and gets one of his supports killed by a headshot. So just like a funny moment that I remember him by, which doesn't really reflect his overall gameplay, but just something I remember and cherish, I guess. So yeah, I'm super excited to see Victoria. I think with a coach like Lori especially, um, they already have that Korean connection, and I think with what I've seen from him, even in tier two, I think he can be really, really good in Owl. I don't think a lot of fan lists are as high on him, but I'm holding out hope for him. Um, and any additions about Victoria Nightwing, or you can just talk about Striker and Valentine.
So about Victoria, he probably will stay in that hard hit scan role. I've seen him play a few maps as like Tracer as well, but when you have Striker, there's like no chance that you'll be playing Tracer unless somehow they choose Striker to be that hard hit scan role. It probably depends on which hero is stronger. I would just put Striker on that. But yeah, Victoria does have some amount of that flexibility, and he is like good with those one clips and just managing the other aspects of Tracer as well. But I wouldn't put it past Striker to like just deny him from playing Tracer at all, because like Striker is the king. So speaking about Striker, he's probably one of my favorite Tracer players of all time. And he, in my opinion, he's still just the best Tracer the league has ever seen, and probably Overwatch has ever seen in my eyes. uh, and he comes in from a brief retirement of sorts, and signs with the Boston Uprising. Uh, and yeah, I think the man's just a god. He's probably going to be the star player, at least in my eyes, for this entire roster. And it'll really be just up to him to sort of save the show, because the tank line is nothing to marvel at, and the support line is decent. So if Striker's well supported enough and has some input coming in from Victoria, as I would still like to see Victoria instead of the third DPS, which is Valentine, I think Striker will still do a bang up job. and at least show that he is individually very skilled, even if he's not able to completely carry the roster. If you saw how Striker and Arns dominated the league in season 3, especially, despite the shortcomings that you could see a little bit of in early season 4, uh, you can see why I have immense faith in this guy still, even coming into a new game in Overwatch 2. Because, Tracer doesn't seem that much altered, so he should still be doing perfectly well. What do you think?
Um, yeah, I mean, Striker is definitely one of the best tracers in the world, and just a really good player in general. So I'm not worried about his quality of play at all. But I feel like um, I'm a bit worried about Striker because he left the shock in a really odd situation. Seemingly, he had some conflicts within the team regarding playtime. Like he was sharing playtime with Tayo, if I remember correctly, and because of some kind of conflict, he left the team. He hadn't retired, right? So sometimes being that good can make you a little egotistical. So, like, I really hope that that isn't the reason why Striker left. And I hope that there aren't any issues because of that within the Boston Uprising either. Because I'm sure none of us would like to hear like a revelation that Striker has let his former success get to his head. But other than that, he's a great player. So it's definitely a high quality pickup, considering that he was a really big name in free agency for the season. And considering that Boston have signed him, they must have either just saved a large chunk of their budget to get him, or just bumped up their budget by a huge amount. Because I haven't seen Boston invest in superstars like that in a while. Um, yeah, that's all from my side about Striker Nightwing. Any additions to make?
I feel like what you're saying about Boston's budgeting probably does have a ring of truth to it, because I think they've changed up their style a little bit here, because they've definitely signed some players that probably other teams don't want to sign, like MCD because of his controversy, uh, and they've kept Valentine despite his lackluster performance last year. And the tank line is nothing to marvel at either. I'm not even trying to make the pun; it's just there. I don't even know what other word to use. Um, but yeah, they have signed Crimzo, who did a really bang up job on the Houston Outlaws. And Striker obviously is a superstar, and despite his brief break from the league, he's still probably has an insane going rate, despite whatever situation he might have had with the shock and with its staff. Uh, I think they're probably going for a different strategy, instead of going for that absolute minimum, like min maxing every cost and benefit. Uh, like Huck's probably shelling out a little bit more out of his pocket compared to the previous years, and hopefully that works out for them here. Uh, anyway, moving on to Valentine, who I have mentioned a little bit that I'm not too high on. You could see that there were some sparks of brilliance in him, but it wasn't anything that hit an insane peak. I would say he did have some nice moments, going on the Genji and sometimes just doing an okay job on the Tracer, but it was really nothing great. I thought last year IM37 did a much better job than Valentine, even though IM37 wasn't as highly regarded, especially on the Sombra. People thought he was just a hit scan player, but I feel like IM37 did much better than Valentine last year. And I fear that may continue into this year until, unless Valentine really steps his gameplay up. I would much prefer to see Victoria and Striker in play in some sort of like Ash Tracer comp than I would like to see Valentine and playing the Echo, unless she's like super busted. So for the DPS line, I think it's really up to Striker to really carry them, and continue his legacy of great performances. The other two DPS are I'm still a little bit iffy on, but some hopes I do have in my back pocket for Victoria. What do you think?
So I am actually conversely of the opinion that Valentine just had a severe lack of resources last year. Uh, what I observed was that there was a lot of miscommunication between the Boston tanks, because of which they were often out of position. I noticed that Myeonbong and Faith had to just pump a lot of resources into them, and that took away resources from I'm37 and Valentine. And I felt like that hurt Valentine a lot because mechanically he was doing a great job. Flexibility wise, I mean, you could see that he was comfortable on a whole horde of DPS heroes. Like he was playing Echo, Tracer, Genji, Mei. I was even surprised with how good his Doomfist was, like for the few matches in which he played it. Um, so I am still excited to see him going into season 5 because his flexibility will be a really big asset considering the additional heroes that are going to be introduced. And I feel like if he gets more resources, um, which I think is likely with one less player in the mix. I think he can do a way better job than he did last year because it'll be Overwatch 2 is going to be more mechanics reliant and less communication reliant from what we've heard so far. So I'm still high on him and I think he'll do a great job. So all in all, with the combination of Valentine, Striker, and Victoria, I think they have most, if not all, the bases covered. And I think it's like a really strong DPS line to have going into Overwatch 2. So it's almost scary. So other teams in the NA region need to keep an eye out for at least these three players. And yeah, that's my take on Valentine. Anything more to add, Nightwing, or should we move on to the supports?
I think we can move on to the supports. We clearly have some slight differences in opinion about the DPS line, and I think uh, the only thing I want to say about that is, I mean, they still had a decent support line to give them some resources last year, and I didn't see Valentine do too great then. So I still maintain that probably it's up to Striker and sometimes Victoria to really carry the flag of the team on.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, then let's move on to the support line. And let's kick things off with Faith, who is the only support retained from last year. Now, Faith is their main support player, and in my opinion, he's fairly well rounded and very team oriented, kind of like Moth. And like back in the contenders days when he was with WGS, I was very high on his Brig, and I also think he plays a good Lucio. Like, there are these Lucios that just entirely stay with their team, play super safe, play slow, play for heals, and then there are others who go completely Reddit, kind of like Lee Jae. I think Faith fits a nice niche in the middle, where he supports his team whenever they need to be supported, which is most of the time, but he steers them in a more aggressive direction. Like I think Faith has a really high speed boost to heal boost ratio, based on what I've seen. But that said, he hasn't really proven to be extraordinary and hasn't really made any major plays in the Overwatch League. So I think he'll be league average this season, especially considering that mechanics are going to be a lot more valued going into Overwatch 2. But I still think he's a good piece to have in case you want a more communication oriented team, especially in your backline. So, yeah, Nightwing, I think I'll let you share your thoughts on him first.
So coming into the 2021 season, I had similar thoughts about uh, Friday, who was picked up for the NYXL, and Faith picked up to the Boston Uprising. But as the season went on, I saw that Faith was not built from that same material. Friday was playing terribly, especially that brick, but Faith was playing exceptionally well. So, uh, I mean, for the expectations that I had, not for like in terms of absolute comparison, uh, I think Faith did do a pretty good job last year and did keep up with his contemporaries across the league. He wasn't anything exceptional in my eyes, at least, but he did the job. He was solid, and that's all you can really ask for. I think he's still a good pickup whenever main supports will be required uh, throughout the Overwatch 2 undulating meta. I don't know what's going to come of that, but he's definitely a player to probably keep in. Uh, I would expect to see him alongside Crimzo in most of the time, just based off of their individual skill, and then MCD coming in instead of Faith for the double flex support sort of comps. So yeah, I think Faith is solid and he should probably stay in. I think he'll provide good aggression to the team, good tempo, as well as just help him secure good positioning. And I think that's really where it's at for Faith. Do you want to talk about the next player, Proelius?
Sure. So let's talk about Crimzo next, who is um, a flex support coming in from the Houston Outlaws this year. And Crimzo, as we all saw last year, really stepped up his game with the Outlaws. But I felt like his team fell a little short. Otherwise, if they were on the same page more often, Houston have gone quite deep into the playoffs. And I feel like Boston probably offered Crimzo a great deal because seeing how well he played, he could have easily negotiated with Houston for a fresh contract, right? And especially considering how flexible he is on like BAP, Ana, Zen, even Moira. So it remains to be seen how good he is on Boston and how he ends up stacking up with the other flex support players this year. It's a little bit hard for me to place him in tiers, like along with the other flex supports, because on one hand he seemed to be doing well individually, but on the other he wasn't always in sync with his team. Now, if that was a team problem, we're Gucci, right? Like, but otherwise, Crimzo may have some communication skills to work on. Like, essentially, he doesn't have to be the shot caller, or like he's not even the main support for this team. But I feel like if he's with, if he isn't in sync with his team this year, that could cause major issues like they did on the Outlaws. But otherwise, individually, the man's really talented, and I'm really excited to see him going into next season. What about you, Nightwing?
Okay, so individually, I thought last year Crimzo did really well from what I saw of him in terms of just the mechanical skill he showed, the way he worked alongside his team. But my main gripe is probably just his possible attitude issues, especially going into a team that's mostly Korean and only has uh, really punk to communicate him with properly in English, right? Uh, he's had some flare ups in the past in the Dallas Fuel with the decay situation they had in season 3, and then he has that sort of flair around him that makes him get into a bit of trouble, and hopefully that doesn't lead to a major fallout within the team. Uh, is what I can hope for. And as long as they take care of that, I think Crimzo is probably the player you want in all of the time. I don't think there's a single situation where you put in MCD instead of Crimzo. You'd probably sub out Faith and then put in MCD and run a double flex support that way. Because as long as Crimzo is able to establish that good communication, good shot calling structure with the team, he should just be in all of the time, based off of his performance last year.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and let's quickly touch upon MCD as well, who is another flex support coming in from the Hangzhou Spark. Now, last year, MCD was removed from the team for misconduct, and I think, like, just leaving that aside, because we are just all about reviewing skill at the moment, I think he might just be a league average flex support, because I don't think he's really incredible on any of the flex support heroes. But he did have some good showings on Ana and Zen last year. One thing about him is that he does have solid positioning. Like, you'll rarely see him get picked off, like, or die first in team fights. So that's a good thing about him. But like you said, Nightwing, I think Crimzo will probably be fielded more than he will, and especially if they're playing BAP, because I think Crimzo's BAP is like many levels above MCDs. He was just like really scary because he used to DPS a whole lot, kind of like Shu and Izayaki, like focus on healing, like some damage here and there, but mainly just be a third DPS and kill people yourself. So yeah, I think MCD is a good backup flex support to have in case there's like another Babs and Meta or like double flex support in general. What do you think about MCD?
Yeah, I think attitude issues aside, obviously, I think anyone listening to this already knows all about MCD's issues with the Hangzhou Spark last year. Leaving that aside, even if you overcome that, he's just not that good on map compared to Crimzo. I think you'd really only put him in when you want, like I said, the double flex support, or maybe you might want to put him in if you want to play Zen. As the last time Crimzo played Zen for an extended period was in season 3, and that wasn't that great. Um, so it may be possible that MCD's Zen is genuinely better than Crimzo's, though I still doubt it. Uh, in most cases, I think he's going to be sort of the sub flex support. Uh, and I mean that's perfectly fine. I think it's a good player to add in terms of just the budgeting for the Boston Uprising. I mean, they probably got him for a lower price just because of all the uh, sort of controversy around him, and I do expect him to still perform decently when actually called up to the stage, as long as he keeps a good relation with the team and just works well with them.
Mm-hmm. Okay, it's all very good points. And I think let's move on to this to the coaching staff then. Starting off with head coach Laurie, who has already been a head coach of this team for the past year, and Laurie has not gotten great results from his lineup so far, but he has got better pieces to work with this year, especially with the likes of Striker and Crimzo being added to the team. And I believe that he can utilize them well enough, at least to try for playoffs. Uh, like having some star talent is almost certainly a requirement at this point in the Overwatch League, if you want to try and get into those like playoff spots, you know. So although I don't think he's going to turn this team into like a top tier roster, um, he is like smart enough and has proven himself enough, at least at the contenders level, for us to have faith in him, to kind of be more competitive than before this year. Just learning constantly and helping his team improve. So yeah, any inputs on Lori Nightwing?
I think he just has this one chance really to show that he's a capable coach. I think last year he did work well somewhat with the pieces he got. You could see that despite the team being a little bit mismatched with each other, Lori did try and create some sort of comps that they could work around. They weren't completely clueless. I think the way Lori sort of worked with the team to execute that Sombra Tracer comp, especially last year, which was a bit unexpected almost for me, because they had moments where, when coached properly, they played that comp to a pretty high level, uh, even against fairly good teams like the Shock and the Gladiators, if I remember correctly. And that goes to show that Lori does have some coaching potential and can make comps work. Uh, Obviously, the landscape for Overwatch 2 is different, so that remains to be seen. But he does have potential, but he only really has this one, maybe last chance to show that he's able to take this team with now newly added star talent and take it to new heights.
Yep, yep. And to support him, he's still got Ascoft, who has been an assistant coach for this team for the past 2 years. And he's also got Barroi, who used to be like a data analyst, but is also an assistant coach now. So I think these two have got a fair amount of experience at the Overwatch League level. For those of you that don't know, Barroi is the creator of Winston's Lab, which used to be like the prime position to get Overwatch League statistics before the actual stats lab was opened up. And before we got all of these detailed team stats available. That's like, although that's mainly thanks to Captain Planet, Barroi also kind of was very early at doing all of that. So he's got a ton of experience with data and can probably help that to recognize patterns within the team, communicate them to Lori, and then improve upon his team's gameplay. And then Ascoff just is familiar with the team, and I guess the management trusts him at this point. Like how can Mineral know that he's good? That's why they've kept him. So I have faith in them overall. Let's see if they can do a good job. I think if they make the playoffs and especially go deep in them, that's like that's an overachievement for them in my opinion. Thoughts on this, Nightwing?
I think I honestly don't have too much to say about Ascoft or Barroi. I'm not really sure what exactly they contribute to the team, if I'm being honest. Um, Hopefully, it's in the positive sense, um, and that's all I really have to say. I mean, I think most of the changes that he saw in the Boston Uprising from their coaching style was when Laurie was signed, and not so much from the everlasting presence of Ascoft uh, or the addition of Barroi. So I don't really know what to think of that. Hopefully, it's like I said, it's positive. Um, you know who I am sort of curious about in terms of how he'll go about managing the Boston Uprising, though, is our Lord and Savior, President of Gaming, Huck, and obviously working under him, Mineral as well, who used to be a coach, but now he's an assistant GM. I think these guys have had a very distinct style of picking up rosters and managing players, managing contracts, and sometimes that's taken a bit of a toll on some players. And but they've also, really been able to scout some really good talent, and in some seasons out of players that you think might not be that good. This season, though, they've sort of changed their strategy a bit and gone for some star players and then some players that you might consider low budget relatively. And we'll see how that really affects them. You know what I want to see from the Boston Uprising, though, is if if you remember the breadsticks campaign from the Vancouver Titans, well, Boston is owned by the Kraft Group, so I want to see a campaign where they like just give out those little the kiddie cheese packets that like kids have for lunch. Uh, that'll probably get their fans, more excited for their matches because otherwise this team's going to be a little bit boring to watch outside of Striker. What do you think
I
about
think
the management?
honestly, leaving the management aside, I really like the cheese idea. I think if they just play cheese comps even in official games, that'll be a huge booster for their publicity. But yeah, no, I mean the management has been around forever. It seems like, right? They know how to manage a roster. They have consistently been with the team. There are not any issues I've heard of with them, and like at least some analysts seem to be really hyping up the Huck striker pairing for some reason. I don't know the reason for that. Maybe I'm just missing something, but I think it's enough to at least have faith that this team's going to be better than they were last year. So that's those are all my thoughts on this team, honestly. Do you have any closing thoughts?
I think just to sum up what I've said already, even though that seems a bit repetitive, I don't want to see Crimzo blow up on social media or have a falling out with his team. I think that will severely damage the Boston Uprising. I want them to set up a good communication structure because, like you said, Proelius, when talking about the supports and Valentine as well, that they weren't very well coordinated last year. And considering that Lori has, stayed on, uh, hopefully that does not continue. And this time they are able to successfully create that communication structure, especially with the new Western players that they're signing. And I think those are the two main things that the team needs to look out for. And if they do that, they should be able to at least be mid-table, if not higher. Um, and they could, punch above their weight and actually go for some of those tournament playoffs and maybe even semifinals or finals if they get really, really good at one particular comp that turns out to be meta. Um, but yeah, some things to be wary about for this team, but they probably can get some good stuff done.
Yup, for sure. And on that note, I think we can end this episode. I'm sure there are going to be a lot of different opinions about this team, just because this seems like a team of lost creatures in a way. So if you guys have any thoughts on the Boston Uprising, do share them in the comments below. And we will see you in the next review, which will be about the Toronto Defiant. Bye bye and have a good day.